Hey guys, tonight we drift back into the flickering lamplight of a London parlor in the late 1800s. You can almost hear the muffled clink of glass, the low hum of conversation, and the faint hiss of gas lamps outside the curtained windows. The air is thick, almost syrupy, with a sweet, smoky perfume that clings to the wallpaper and your clothes. You lean back into a well-worn armchair, the velvet crushed flat by decades of similar late-night gatherings. On a small side table there's an ornate pipe, its bowl glowing faintly red, and you realize you're about to take a very different kind of trip tonight, Victorian style, and you probably won't survive this, at least not with your dignity intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and drop your location and your local time in the comments. It's always fascinating to see where in the world you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You settle deeper into the chair, and the smoke curls lazily in the air, catching the lamplight like little ribbons of amber silk. This isn't just tobacco, it's opium, the darling of Victorian leisure for those with money to spare and ennui to cure. You take a slow inhale, and there's a gentle, numbing sweetness to it. People in this era talk about it the way modern folks talk about a fine wine or a particularly good cup of coffee. It's not some shady back-alley vice, not yet. Here, in this genteel setting, it's as much a social lubricant as it is an escape hatch. Across the table, a man with a waxed mustache tells a story about his recent voyage to the east, how he visited a port in Canton and saw entire opium dens filled with locals sprawled on bamboo couches. You nod, half listening, because the edges of the room are already blurring. The Victorians were fascinated with this imported luxury, and Britain had more than a hand in making sure it stayed available. After all, the Opium Wars weren't just a footnote. They were a calculated move to protect trade and profit. Historians still argue whether Britain's government was more motivated by economic necessity or imperial arrogance, but in the parlors of London, the debate doesn't matter. The product is here, the pipe is lit, the evenings are long. Opium was everywhere, prescriptions, tonics, even baby medicine, but here, in its purest smoking form, it carried an extra mystique, the smoky taste, the slow flood of warmth, the way conversation would drift from politics to poetry to half-remembered dreams. For some, it was a gateway to creativity. Samuel Taylor Coleridge famously claimed that Kubla Khan came to him in an opium-induced vision, though he also blamed the drug for his decline. For others, it was a quiet end to the day, a ritual like reading by the fire. The pipe passes back to you. You notice the way its ivory stem feels cool against your lips, the faint scent of resin lingering even before you inhale. There's something ceremonial about it, loading the sticky brown paste, holding the flame just right, watching the smoke draw in slow and steady. No one rushes here. This is an age when leisure is measured in hours, not minutes, and the haze is as much about atmosphere as intoxication. The odd thing is how respectable it all feels. In the popular imagination today, opium dens are dark, illicit places, but in the Victorian middle and upper classes, smoking opium in a private home was almost stylish. The den of vice was not always in the slums. Sometimes it was just down the street from Parliament. You can't help but notice the peculiar silence that falls after a few rounds. People speak softer, laugh slower, and glance off into corners like they're watching invisible lantern shows. Someone mentions the chasing the dragon technique, where the smoke is drawn over a heated surface before inhaling. You watch as the blue-gray tendrils swirl like tiny ghosts, dissipating into the shadows. There's an undertone here, though, a quiet awareness that too much of this will change you. Maybe not tonight, but eventually. That dull ache in the joints, the odd hollow in the cheeks, the mornings where you can't quite wake up. Some Victorian doctors warned about it, but most looked the other way, prescribing opium in one form or another for everything from migraines to menstrual cramps, and so the haze lingered in homes and clubs, a sweet-smelling guest that no one wanted to throw out. Outside, the city is still alive. The clip-clop of horses, the cry of a newspaper boy hawking headlines about politics and empire. But inside, you are far away. Your eyelids grow heavy, your thoughts stretch out like warm molasses. Someone says something about the taste being different depending on whether it's smoked in Canton or Calcutta, and you file that away without much interest. You're already drifting. Opium wasn't the only drug in Victorian society, but it set the tone for the era's strange dance between propriety and indulgence. Here, in this smoke-filled parlor, you can feel the balance tipping. The next time the pipe comes your way, you hesitate just a second longer. But then again, what's the harm? The next morning, you find yourself at a breakfast table draped in a lace cloth, sunlight pouring in through tall sash windows. Outside, a milk cart rattles by, but your host, eyes still a little glassy from last night, slides a small amber bottle toward you. The liquid inside catches the light, deep and reddish-brown, with a faint medicinal smell that almost masks its true potency. Laudanum, they say, as casually as someone today might offer aspirin. A few drops in your tea, and the day will be much easier. You hesitate, but not for long. In Victorian Britain, laudanum was the household's quiet workhorse, equal parts comfort, cure, and chemical escape. It was essentially opium dissolved in alcohol, often fortified with a dash of spice or coloring to make it seem less menacing. And it was everywhere, in the doctor's bag, in the grocer's shop, on the shelf next to the marmalade. No prescription needed, no awkward questions asked. You pour a little into your tea, watching the liquid swirl, darkening the gentle amber into something richer. The taste is bitter, but the warmth spreads quickly, curling into your limbs. This is the Victorian multi-tool: painkiller, sleep aid, cough suppressant, antidepressant, though they didn't use that word yet. For poets and artists, laudanum wasn't just medicine, it was a muse. Elizabeth Barrett Browning swore by it for her chronic illness, and Thomas de Quincey immortalized it in Confessions of an English Opium Eater, a book that read half like a warning and half like a love letter. Historians still argue whether de Quincey intended to romanticize laudanum or scare his readers. Either way, sales went up. It was so woven into daily life that you'd see respectable mothers dosing their children when they couldn't sleep, or working men taking a quick swig before a long shift at the docks. One quirky little fact: even pets weren't off limits. There are scattered reports of cats and dogs being given laudanum for nervousness or injury. Imagine your tabby snoozing blissfully after a drop of the same stuff that fueled Victorian literary salons. As you sip, you notice how your host's conversation drifts between topics without much care for order. First the weather, then politics, then a vivid dream about walking through a hallway made of glass. You suspect the laudanum has smoothed the edges of their thoughts the way it's smoothing yours now. The strange thing is how it sidesteps scandal. Alcohol had its critics, opium smoking its whispered dangers, but laudanum? It was wrapped in the soft blanket of respectability. After all, it came in a bottle, with a tidy label, often sold in apothecaries alongside rosewater and lavender oil. Even its name had an almost poetic lilt, far from the grit of the poppy fields it came from. Doctors recommended it for everything from female complaints to tuberculosis. Sailors took it on long voyages to steady their nerves. Writers leaned on it to get through sleepless nights. And the effects, though addictive, were subtle enough at first that you could convince yourself you were just a little more relaxed than usual. The room feels warmer now. Your teacup is nearly empty, and there's a pleasant looseness in your shoulders. Somewhere in the distance, a clock chimes the hour, but you've lost track of which one. Outside, a delivery boy whistles as he passes, and the sound feels both far away and too close. A servant brings in a plate of scones, and your host sprinkles sugar absent-mindedly over their tea. You catch sight of the laudanum bottle again, its cork slightly stained from repeated use. and realize this is as routine to them as adding milk. No secret, no shame, just part of the rhythm of Victorian life. You lean back, feeling the faintest hum in your fingertips. This isn't the sharp, euphoric rush of last night's opium smoke. It's slower, gentler, more like a fog that rolls in without you noticing until the whole landscape is different. And yet, beneath that softness, there's a current, a subtle tug. You know, if you took a little more, you'd sink even deeper. But there's still a day ahead, streets to walk, shops to visit, other experiments to try. So you set the cup down, watch the light spill across the tablecloth, and remind yourself, the Victorians were just getting started. You step out into the brisk London air, the chill biting enough to clear some of the laudanum haze, though not all of it. Cobblestones glisten from a morning drizzle, and the smell of coal smoke hangs over the street. Your boots click steadily until you pause in front of a polished shopfront with gold lettering across the glass. Pharmaceuticals, fine remedies. Inside, it smells faintly of citrus oil and fresh paper, and behind the counter is a display that catches your eye. Small, elegant bottles, labels in tidy copperplate script, and there, just to the left of the headache powders, are slender tins marked coca extract. The apothecary notices your interest and smiles knowingly. "Ah, the latest in continental medicine," he says, pulling one down. "A wonderful stimulant, quite invigorating for the constitution." Victorian cocaine wasn't the illicit street-traded danger it is today. It was a darling of the medical world. Derived from coca leaves, it was praised for sharpening focus, banishing fatigue, and lending a certain sparkle to social gatherings. Even Queen Victoria herself is said to have enjoyed a bit of coca wine, and doctors prescribed cocaine lozenges for everything from sore throats to shyness. You try one. The taste is oddly pleasant, slightly sweet with a faint herbal kick. Within minutes, you feel brighter, lighter, as if someone has nudged your senses into sharper focus. The laudanum fog retreats, replaced by a clean, alert energy. Your steps quicken without thinking, and even the drizzle feels invigorating. Cocaine in the Victorian era had none of the dark reputation it carries now. It was sold in toothache drops, hay fever cures, even restorative tonics for businessmen worn down by the stress of city life. One quirky tidbit: some early throat lozenges combined cocaine with gold leaf, because why not make your medicinal pick-me-up sparkle as it melts in your mouth? Historians still argue whether the medical profession genuinely misunderstood cocaine's addictive potential or simply ignored it for the sake of its immediate benefits. Either way, by the 1880s, it was firmly embedded in both medical practice and upper-class leisure. Sigmund Freud wrote enthusiastically about its powers, before later cautioning against overuse when patients began showing alarming side effects. You wander past a tobacconist and notice a poster in the window. Vin Mariani, the tonic of the century. The French import is coca wine, a blend of Bordeaux and coca leaf extract. Advertisements boast endorsements from royalty, opera singers, even the Pope. It's the perfect social drink, one that promises both sophistication and stamina. The Victorians loved their layered intoxications, and coca wine delivered a gentle push without the heavy blur of pure alcohol. By mid-afternoon, you're seated in a small cafe watching the bustle outside. The cocaine lozenge still hums softly in your bloodstream, your thoughts moving quickly but cleanly. You imagine Victorian professionals, lawyers, journalists, shop owners, slipping one into their mouths before an important meeting, just as someone today might down an espresso. No stigma, no secrecy, just a modern marvel in their eyes. The apothecary you visited earlier mentioned that some adventurous sorts even sprinkled coca extract into cigarettes, creating a mild but steady lift. You picture a smoky gentleman's club, where the air is laced with both nicotine and the faint tingle of cocaine, conversations buzzing at a sharper pitch than usual. But even in this polite, medicinal context, there's an undercurrent. A few sharp-eyed physicians begin whispering about patients who can't seem to go without their nerve tonic. A singer whose voice was once clear now speaks too fast, her hands trembling. A clerk who once needed a lozenge for an afternoon slump now buys them by the dozen. The Victorian habit of embracing novelty without much caution was, once again, sowing seeds for trouble. Still, for now, the energy feels too good to question. You finish your tea, step back into the street, and the city seems brighter, faster, more alive. Somewhere ahead, another shop awaits, selling something even more curious. The shop you enter next is smaller, darker, and smells faintly of camphor and something sharper, like a cross between a hospital corridor and a distillery. A handful of well-dressed patrons linger near the counter, speaking in low tones, but you notice their eyes dart toward a curtained doorway in the back. The man behind the counter gives you a polite nod, then tilts his head toward the door. "Ether?" he asks, in the same way a bartender might offer a familiar drink. You've heard of ether in the medical sense, an anesthetic for surgery, but here, it's whispered about as something different. In the 19th century, ether parties, or ether frolics, were not unheard of. People would gather in drawing rooms or back rooms like this one, inhale the sweet, volatile fumes, and float into a giddy, disconnected state. In rural parts of Ireland and Scotland, ether was even sold at markets, measured out like whiskey and gulped down for its intoxicating effects. You step into the back room, and the curtains close behind you. It's dim, the only light coming from a few oil lamps on the walls. A row of chairs lines one side, each with a small bottle and a length of cloth. The host explains the procedure. You soak the cloth, bring it to your face, and inhale. The first breath is chemical, almost floral, and it makes your lips tingle. The second pulls at the edges of your vision, as if someone has drawn a curtain inside your head. Laughter breaks out from the corner. A woman in a feathered hat giggles uncontrollably, her parasol tipping dangerously close to a lamp. A man beside her sways in his seat, eyes half closed, wearing the faint, blissed-out smile of someone temporarily removed from the cares of reality. The mood here is different from the slow, dreamy draw of opium or the crisp alertness of cocaine. It's lightheaded, playful, almost slapstick. Historians still argue whether these gatherings were more about medical curiosity or pure hedonism. After all, ether was considered a scientific marvel. Used to dull the agony of surgery, it was hailed as a humane leap forward. But outside the operating theater, its ability to make people light, silly, and briefly detached from reality made it an irresistible social experiment. You take another breath through the cloth. The room tilts slightly, not in a frightening way, but like the sway of a ship in calm waters. There's a warmth in your chest, a faint buzzing in your ears, and for a moment you feel oddly weightless. Someone across the room tries to stand, misjudges their balance, and ends up on the floor in a heap of muffled laughter. No one rushes to help. They just wait for him to get up, still chuckling. One quirky tidbit. In some temperance-minded communities, ether was actually preferred over alcohol because it didn't carry the same social stigma, despite being far more unpredictable in its effects. There are even accounts of people drinking small doses of liquid ether, chasing the quick, dizzying high like a shot of spirits. You glance toward the corner, where two men are having an animated debate about whether ether unlocks the mind or merely scrambles it. Their sentences run into each other, bursts of laughter interrupting half-finished thoughts. You can't tell if they're discussing philosophy or just inventing new nonsense. After a while, the host signals that it's best to stop. The effects wear off quickly, but overindulgence can leave you nauseous. You stand, a little unsteady but grinning despite yourself, and step back into the cooler, cleaner air of the shop. The sudden return of clarity is almost a shock, like stepping out of a warm bath into winter air. As you button your coat, you think about the Victorians' willingness to turn just about any chemical discovery into a social pastime. If ether could make surgery bearable, why not also make a Tuesday night more interesting? The line between medicine and entertainment was never as firm as we like to imagine. and you've only just started to see how blurred it could get. The evening finds you walking down a quieter street where the smell of coal smoke is gentler and the lamplight glows gold on the wet cobblestones. You've been told there's a physician nearby with an unusual habit, one that's whispered about by his patients, but rarely mentioned in polite company. You find the brass plaque outside his door, surgery and consultations by appointment. You knock, and a servant ushers you into a narrow hallway lined with framed anatomy drawings. The doctor himself greets you warmly, ushering you into a back office. On the desk sits a dark, squat bottle with a plain label, chloroform. You know it as the stuff surgeons use to knock patients out before cutting, yet here it's presented as something far more casual. Trouble sleeping? Restlessness? Perhaps a touch of the nerves? He asks. You nod uncertainly, and he pours a small measure onto a folded cloth, handing it to you as if offering a handkerchief. The scent is sweet, almost fruity, but with a chemical edge that prickles the inside of your nose. You inhale tentatively. The Victorians embraced chloroform with open arms when it appeared in the 1840s. In the surgical world, it was a miracle. No more screaming, no more agony during amputations or tumor removals. Queen Victoria herself famously used it during the births of 2 of her children, lending the substance a royal stamp of approval. That royal nod did wonders for its popularity, making it seem not just safe, but fashionable. Historians still argue whether chloroform's domestic use was born of necessity or sheer curiosity. Whatever the case, people began experimenting with it far beyond the surgical table. Housewives used it for menstrual cramps, insomniacs for long, uninterrupted nights, and some adventurous sorts for a brief, dreamlike escape from the day's tedium. You take a second breath through the cloth, and the room begins to soften at the edges. It's not the warm, drifting haze of opium, nor the bright hum of cocaine. This is heavier, like sinking into thick velvet. The ticking of the doctor's clock seems slower, and your limbs feel pleasantly leaden. A woman in the waiting room, her bonnet slightly askew, hums softly to herself, clearly halfway to sleep. The doctor explains that a small dose induces only a short rest, 10 or 15 minutes of drifting somewhere between waking and dreaming. But the danger lies in taking too much. Chloroform has a narrow line between safe sedation and never waking up at all. Still, many Victorians ignored the warnings, convinced that if it was good enough for royalty, it was good enough for them. One quirky tidbit: some traveling performers and stage magicians used chloroform in their acts, claiming to, mystically, send audience members into a trance, though in truth it was just chemistry at work. In more than one case, such stunts ended badly, fueling whispered scandals that never fully dimmed the drug's allure. You set the cloth down, and the world seeps back in slowly. The doctor smiles, offering a small brown bottle for home use, with the caution to use sparingly. You slip it into your coat pocket, feeling the cool glass against your fingers. Outside, the night air is sharper, sobering you. You can still taste the faint sweetness in your throat, and you wonder how many households have a bottle tucked away in some drawer, waiting for sleepless nights or curious evenings. The Victorians were nothing if not inventive in turning the tools of medicine into instruments of leisure, and as you head back toward the glow of the main street, you know there are still stranger remedies waiting to be discovered before the night is over. The main street hums with life. Horses clopping past, vendors calling out the last of their wares, and a faint rhythm from a street organ somewhere in the distance. You follow the sound toward a small square where a knot of people has gathered around a painted wagon. Lanterns hang from its sides, casting warm light over the hand-lettered sign, Dr. Whitcomb's Elixir for All Human Ailments. A tall man in a velvet coat stands atop the wagon, holding a green glass bottle aloft. His voice carries with the confidence of a seasoned showman. "Ladies and gentlemen, this miracle tonic will banish fatigue, soothe the stomach, sharpen the mind, and warm the very soul." You edge closer, and the air around the wagon smells faintly of molasses and something sharper. A woman beside you whispers, "That's his patent medicine. Rumor is it's got alcohol, opium, and God knows what else in it." She doesn't sound disapproving. Patent medicines were the Victorian equivalent of supermarket cure-alls, their recipes fiercely guarded and their claims grandiose. Without modern regulations, they could contain almost anything: morphine, cocaine, alcohol, cannabis, and were sold freely to anyone with the coin. Labels promised relief from ailments as diverse as nervous afflictions and torpid liver, often with testimonials from supposed happy customers. The showman uncorks the bottle and pours a measure into a tin cup, handing it to a man in the crowd. The man downs it in one swallow, wipes his mouth and nods appreciatively. Soon, coins are clinking into the collection tin, and bottles are changing hands faster than you can count. You take your own bottle, purely for research, of course, and unstopper it. The liquid inside is thick, syrupy, with a sweet aroma that almost masks the bite of alcohol. You sip. Warmth floods your chest, a mix of mellow opiate undertone and the friendly burn of spirits. Your limbs feel looser, your thoughts a touch fuzzier, but the crowd's energy keeps you from sinking too deep. Historians still argue whether patent medicines were genuinely believed to work, or whether the Victorians simply enjoyed their recreational effects under the polite cover of treatment. After all, in an era when talking openly about intoxication could be frowned upon, these tonics provided a perfectly respectable excuse. One quirky tidbit: some patent medicine makers marketed their products specifically for children, complete with cheerful illustrations and mild formulas that still contained surprising amounts of morphine. It wasn't uncommon for fretful babies to be soothed with a spoonful of syrup, much to the relief of exhausted parents. You watch Dr. Whitcomb work the crowd, his patter never breaking, his smile fixed as he tosses bottle after bottle to eager hands. He promises the elixir will make weak men strong, restore the beauty of aging women, and even revive the marital spark for couples. The crowd laughs and cheers, though whether at the claim or in anticipation of testing it, you can't tell. As the wagon begins to roll onto the next town, you tuck your bottle into your coat. The warmth lingers, and you think about how many of these concoctions were less about curing disease and more about taking the edge off daily life. In an age of strict manners and relentless work, a sweet, numbing syrup was perhaps as much a comfort as a cure. The square quiets as the wagon disappears into the dark, leaving only the faint taste of molasses on your tongue and the sense that the next street might hold something even stranger. The next street feels more like a back alley, narrow, cobbled, and damp, with faint lamplight glinting off the puddles. Somewhere ahead you hear the hiss of steam and the low hum of conversation. When you round the corner, you find the source. A little tea shop, its windows fogged from within, the painted sign above the door reading "The Turkish Room." You step inside, and warm, spiced air wraps around you. Tables are set with small porcelain cups, and at the back of the room stands a man in a fez, ladling a dark, fragrant liquid from a brass pot. The drink is coffee, but not the brisk, bracing sort you're used to. This is rich, almost syrupy, and laced with something else entirely. Victorians adored coffee and tea, but in some circles these beverages were improved with an extra ingredient, often coca leaf extract or even small doses of morphine. In London, Paris, and port cities along the Mediterranean, coffee houses would serve what they called medicated drinks to patrons looking for more than a caffeine lift. You take your seat, and the man in the fez brings a cup to your table. The surface glistens with a thin film of oil, and the smell is deep. Earthy coffee mingled with something slightly bitter, almost medicinal. You take a cautious sip. The coffee's warmth blooms instantly, but within minutes there's a second wave, a bright, alert energy that feels a little too sharp to be from caffeine alone. Historians still argue whether these blends were considered indulgent vices or merely part of the exotic charm imported from far-off lands. In Victorian travel writing, descriptions of Turkish coffee often hinted at mysterious additives, though few dared to list them openly. At the table next to you, a pair of sailors talk rapidly, gesturing with their cups, their words tumbling over one another. At another, a middle-aged woman sketches in a notebook, her eyes darting across the page with quick, deliberate strokes. The air is thick with steam, tobacco smoke, and the faint medicinal note of coca. One quirky tidbit? In some parts of Europe, pharmacies doubled as coffee houses, serving medicated brews under the guise of therapeutic tonics. The line between your morning pick-me-up and your prescription was sometimes just a matter of the shop sign outside. Your second sip is smoother, and you find yourself leaning into the slow swirl of voices around you. The shop owner chats with a man in a velvet waistcoat about a new shipment from Alexandria, dropping hints about a blend for the nerves that's due in next week. Everyone here seems to know the code. No one says what's really in their cup, but everyone understands. Eventually, the steam from your cup fades, and the last mouthful is more bitter than sweet. You stand, the floor under your feet feeling strangely steady, yet your mind quickened, like the night has taken on a slight electric charge. Stepping outside, the cooler air prickles your skin, but you're already scanning the street ahead, wondering what the next doorway might hold. A damp wind curls around the corner as you follow a dim side street toward the river. The smell changes here, less of bread and coal, more of rope, tar, and wet timber. Dockside. Ships loom against the night sky, their masts creaking, and the taverns nearby spill out warm light and the murmur of voices. One of them, a squat building with peeling blue paint, has a swinging sign that reads, "The Sailor's Rest." Inside, the air is thick with pipe smoke, the tang of salt, and something sharper, rum. But not just rum. A group of men huddle over the bar, their mugs frothing with a pale liquid that doesn't smell entirely like alcohol. You take a seat nearby, and the barman, a heavy-shouldered man with sleeves rolled up, gives you a nod. "Something to warm you? Or something to lift you?" he asks, his eyebrow arching just slightly. It's the latter you're curious about, so he pours from a bottle wrapped in twine. The liquid glints faintly, and as he sets it down, the aroma is unmistakable. Alcohol laced with laudanum. Among sailors, this blend is sometimes called "knock me down," part celebratory drink, part painkiller for long voyages and rough landings. You take a slow sip. The rum's warmth hits first, followed by the slow, velvety creep of opium's familiar haze. For men who've been battered by storms and shipboard labor, it's a balm, and for some, a necessity. Historians still argue whether such mixtures were a dockside invention or a carryover from naval medicine, where alcohol and laudanum were both staples. In wartime, the combination was issued to calm injured soldiers before surgery. In peacetime, sailors kept the recipe alive for entirely different reasons. One quirky tidbit: some dockside pubs offered a flat rate for nights when sailors couldn't pay, letting a man drink himself into oblivion in exchange for future labor unloading cargo. The arrangement was convenient for tavern owners and utterly disastrous for the sailors' already precarious finances. Around you, voices rise and fall in a dozen accents. A man with a faded tattoo of an anchor tells a story about a storm off Cape Horn, his words growing slower and sloppier as the laudanum takes hold. Another taps out a sea shanty rhythm on the bar with the side of his mug. You feel the mix working on you too, making the world softer, voices thicker, time less important. You realize this drink is as much a social glue as a chemical escape. In the world of transient labor and dangerous work, a shared haze is a form of trust. A man too relaxed to fight you is a man who'll probably watch your back in the next brawl, or at least share his blanket. When you step back outside, the river smells sharper and colder than before. Ships creak and sway, their lanterns flickering like distant fireflies. The taste of rum and opium lingers in your mouth, a reminder that even here, far from parlors and apothecaries, the Victorian appetite for altered states was alive and well. The street away from the docks grows wider, cleaner, and quieter. Shop windows gleam with imported fabrics, porcelain, and delicacies stacked in pyramids. You pass a storefront framed in polished brass, its sign painted in elegant script. Dufresne Coe, fine wines and spirits. Inside, the air smells of cork, oak, and something sweetly herbal. Rows of bottles line the shelves, their labels in French, Italian, and Spanish. A tall clerk in a tailored waistcoat approaches, his voice warm with practiced charm. "Perhaps you'd enjoy something invigorating?" he says, guiding you toward a polished counter at the back. From beneath it, he produces a dark green bottle embossed with a gold crest. "This," he says, "is Vin Mariani, wine infused with coca leaves from Peru, beloved by popes, presidents, and poets alike." He uncorks it, and the fragrance is rich, velvety red wine layered with a subtle, almost floral sharpness. You take a sip. The tannic warmth of the Bordeaux rolls over your tongue, followed by a rising alertness that feels brighter and cleaner than alcohol alone. Your shoulders lighten, your thoughts sharpen. In the Victorian era, coca wine was marketed as a tonic for fatigue, melancholy, and even shyness. Its creator, Angelo Mariani, boasted endorsements from royalty and scientific luminaries. Historians still argue whether its fame came from genuine medicinal belief or from the fashionable thrill of its exotic South American ingredient. One quirky tidbit? Mariani sponsored artists, writers, and even entire expeditions in exchange for public praise of his wine, effectively inventing a 19th century version of influencer marketing. The clerk pours another taste and leans in. "We also have coca bitters, excellent in cocktails, or perhaps you'd like to try this tonic from the Orient." He gestures to a smaller brown bottle labeled simply Cola Elixir. The Victorians were entranced by ingredients from distant colonies: cola nuts, coca leaves, cinchona bark, each carrying not just chemical effects, but the allure of empire. Around you, customers in evening dress sample cordials, while discussing theater premieres and upcoming travels. For them, these drinks are part status symbol, part social lubricant. The medicinal claim means you can take a glass before dinner without scandal, even if the warm rush in your bloodstream is less about health and more about pleasure. You leave the shop with a small bottle wrapped in brown paper, its weight in your pocket, a quiet promise. Outside, the evening is crisper, the lamps brighter. The buzz from the coca wine hums in your limbs, making the city's edges seem sharper, more inviting, as though the night ahead might be a little longer than usual and you'll be wide awake for every moment of it. The hum of the coca wine is still with you as you drift toward a street lit by the blue glow of a chemist's lamps. Inside, shelves climb all the way to the ceiling, crowded with glass jars, apothecary bottles, and polished brass instruments. A small bell jingles overhead as you step in, and the man behind the counter, spectacles low on his nose, looks up from decanting a dark liquid into a vial. In the corner, a locked glass case glints. Within it, syringes. Their barrels are polished glass, their plungers smooth metal, their needles surprisingly fine. You lean closer, and the chemist notices. "Ah, the newest marvel," he says softly. "Morphia injections. Direct, precise, efficient." Morphine had been isolated from opium decades earlier, but in the Victorian era, the invention of the hypodermic syringe made it a wonder drug for doctors and a dangerously easy indulgence for patients. You watch as the chemist produces a small corked bottle labeled morphia sulfas, then demonstrates drawing the liquid into the syringe. Historians still argue whether the rise in morphine dependence was a medical accident or an inevitable outcome of making relief from pain so clean, so immediate. The records from the era show countless respectable men and women carrying their own syringes, ostensibly for neuralgia or migraines. One quirky tidbit: in some elite households, morphine kits were monogrammed and kept in velvet-lined cases, as much a status object as a silver tea service. The chemist lets you hold the syringe, cool, surprisingly heavy. You can imagine its appeal: no bitter taste, no messy smoke, no telltale scent clinging to clothes. Just a discreet prick, a moment's pause, and then the slow flood of calm through the body. He shows you a ledger of regular customers, names you recognize from society pages. Some buy morphine powder to dissolve at home. Others pay for the chemist's own steady hand. The tone is clinical, but the undertone is clear. This is a private service for those who can afford it. As you leave, the gaslight outside seems to shimmer faintly. The street feels quieter, your own steps almost too soft on the pavement. It's easy to imagine how the Victorians, living in a world of industrial noise and constant movement, could come to crave this kind of silent, intimate escape, one that left no trace except the memory of a needle's cool kiss. You head deeper into the city's heart, where the streets pulse with a different kind of life. Brass bands from dance halls, the faint wail of a fiddle drifting out of a basement bar, the clink of glasses in back rooms. Ahead, a flickering sign reads, "Billiards Tonic," its paint curling under layers of soot. Inside, smoke curls lazily in the warm, dim air. The tables are crowded not with billiard players but with card games, drinks, and an odd assortment of glass tumblers lined along the bar. A young bartender with rolled sleeves and a sharp smile nods you toward an empty stool. "What's your speed tonight? Something to settle you, or to make your boots tap?" he asks. You choose the latter, and he grins knowingly, reaching for a squat bottle with no label. He pours a splash into your glass, tops it with soda water, and drops in a curl of lemon peel. It's a coca-based stimulant tonic, popular in the 1880s and 1890s, touted as a pick-me-up for athletes, businessmen, and anyone who needed to stay sharp. The Victorians loved these brain tonics, many of which contain not just coca but cola nut extract for an extra caffeine jolt. The fizz dances on your tongue, the bitterness giving way to a subtle, restless energy. Historians still argue whether these fizzy concoctions were truly seen as medicine or simply a clever legal loophole to sell a socially acceptable high. The advertisements certainly leaned hard on the health angle, showing sketches of happy office clerks, blushing brides, and wide-eyed children. One quirky tidbit: some early recipes for these tonics were close cousins to what would later become the first formulas for Coca-Cola and other global soft drinks. Yes, your modern soda aisle traces a family tree with some surprisingly altered Victorian relatives. As the tonic kicks in, the room feels sharper, the laughter crisper, and your foot starts tapping in time with the piano from the corner. Men at the next table slap cards onto the wood, grinning as coins clink in the pot. A woman in a red scarf sips her own fizz, her eyes bright and alert. The bartender leans over and murmurs about a nightcap version of the drink. Same fizz, but with a touch of coca wine for those who want to balance the speed with a little warmth. You decline, content with the clean, humming current running under your skin. When you step back outside, the tonic keeps you moving, making the city seem alive in a way it hadn't before. The street lamps glitter like stars within reach, and even the distant rumble of carriages sounds like part of some private music only you can hear. Your boots click over cobblestones that slope gently upward, away from the neon hum of drink halls and into a quieter district where the houses stand shoulder to shoulder, their windows shuttered against the night. You catch a faint herbal scent drifting from an upstairs room, something not quite floral, not quite bitter. Curious, you follow it to a narrow doorway marked only by a brass number plate. Inside, the hallway is dim and narrow, lined with dark wainscoting. A soft voice greets you from the top of the stairs, and moments later you're ushered into a sitting room that feels like a cross between a doctor's office and a parlor. The walls are lined with books on natural philosophy, and the low table in the center is cluttered with teacups, tiny spoons, and shallow bowls of dried leaves. Your host, a bespectacled woman in a dove-gray dress, begins to speak in measured tones about chloral hydrate, a relatively new sedative in Victorian medicine introduced in the 1860s. She calls it sleep in a bottle. Dissolved into sweetened water or wine, it was prescribed for insomnia, nervous afflictions, and even certain types of seizures. You're handed a porcelain cup filled with a clear, faintly sweet liquid. The first sip is unremarkable, just a ghost of vanilla, but within minutes, a soft heaviness begins to press at the edges of your mind. The room seems gentler, the lamplight more golden, the ticking clock on the mantel slower. Historians still argue whether chloral was considered a breakthrough for public health or a dangerous enabler of quiet dependency. Doctors lauded its effectiveness, but newspapers began whispering about patients who couldn't sleep without it, and about wealthy invalids whose nervous conditions worsened with prolonged use. One quirky tidbit? Chloral hydrate earned a notorious nickname among some Victorian bohemians: knockout drops. In certain circles, it was slipped into drinks at parties not maliciously, but as a kind of eccentric joke. Guests would wake up hours later, confused but unharmed, in the host's library armchair. As your hostess speaks, her voice seems to grow softer and more distant. You notice her own teacup is half full, resting on a stack of medical journals. She explains that chloral's real danger wasn't wild intoxication, but its quiet, creeping effect. It invited people to surrender control night after night, until they didn't remember what natural sleep felt like. You leave with your head pleasantly heavy, the air outside cool on your cheeks. The street feels dreamlike, every sound muffled, every shadow softer at the edges. It's easy to see how, for Victorians weary of a restless, soot-choked city, this gentle slide into stillness could become more than a remedy. It could become a ritual. The night air carries you toward a row of modest brick buildings, their ground floors lit by flickering oil lamps behind drawn curtains. One door stands slightly ajar, warm light spilling into the street along with the faint clink of glass and the murmur of conversation. Inside, the room is small but cozy. Worn armchairs, a coal fire, and a broad oak counter laden with ceramic jars. A silver-haired man in a neat waistcoat greets you with the easy confidence of someone who has dispensed comfort to the same neighborhood for decades. "You look like you've been walking a while," he says, already reaching for a jar labeled laudanum. The amber liquid within glows in the firelight. Laudanum, opium dissolved in alcohol, was the Victorian era's quiet cure-all, as likely to be found in a wealthy home's cabinet as in a rural village shop. It treated coughs, cramps, sleeplessness, anxiety, and almost any complaint a patient might name. The man pours a small measure into a glass of water and slides it toward you. The first sip is faintly bitter, but quickly overtaken by a warmth that spreads from your chest outward, dissolving the tightness in your muscles. Your thoughts slow just enough for the crackle of the fire to take on a kind of hypnotic depth. Historians still argue whether laudanum's ubiquity was a medical blessing, relieving countless daily miseries, or a societal problem hiding in plain sight. After all, it was taken by everyone from factory laborers to prime ministers, often without the faintest awareness of its addictive grip. One quirky tidbit: Victorian mothers sometimes gave laudanum-laced soothing syrups to teething infants, both to dull the pain and to grant the parents a precious night's rest. Newspapers occasionally printed tragic tales of overdoses, but such warnings rarely stemmed the tide of its use. Around you, the patrons speak in low voices, their eyes half-lidded, their movements unhurried. One man reads a newspaper he's barely turned in 20 minutes. A woman nearby dips her teaspoon into a cordial glass, stirring absently before sipping. This is not a place for excitement. It's a refuge for those who want to step outside the relentless rhythm of the city. When you leave, the street feels almost too loud, the clip-clop of hooves and hiss of steam from a passing cart slicing into the laudanum's cushion. But the warmth lingers in your chest, a secret ember against the cool night, as though you've carried a little of the firelight out into the darkness. The city feels quieter now, as though it knows you've reached the end of your wanderings. The streets widen into a square where the gas lamps burn steadily, and the air carries the faint medicinal tang of menthol and eucalyptus. You follow it to a bright shop whose windows display gleaming brass scales, neat paper packets, and shelves of glass apothecary jars. Inside, the scent is stronger, sharp yet soothing. A young assistant in a crisp white apron offers you a lozenge from a small tin. It's chalky at first, then cooling, the kind of taste that seems to open your lungs with every breath. She explains it's an inhalant remedy, one of many Victorian respiratory aids meant to ward off the smog's grip on the chest. These inhalants often carried not just menthol but a dash of ammonia, chloroform vapor, or even tiny traces of ether. Victorians would tuck small pocket-sized inhalers into handbags or waistcoat pockets, ready to discreetly take a sniff when the air turned foul. Some were marketed to singers, promising to keep the voice clear and sweet, even after smoky halls or long hours at the theater. Historians still argue whether such inhalants were genuinely therapeutic or just clever marketing to make medicinal vapors fashionable. The line between medical necessity and trendy accessory blurred easily when the case was made of silver filigree or tortoiseshell. One quirky tidbit: there were even menthol cigarettes, sold purely as cough remedies, advertised with straight-faced claims that smoking them would soothe the throat. The irony, of course, was lost on the era's consumers. You try one of the shop's small inhalers, a polished metal tube with a screw-top lid. Inside, a wad of cotton is soaked in the menthol chloroform mix. One deep breath brings an icy rush that clears your sinuses and leaves your head light. It's easy to picture Victorians finding this little jolt comforting during foggy mornings or in the middle of a crowded railway carriage. As you step outside for the last time tonight, the menthol still cools your throat, and the gaslight halos blur faintly at the edges. The square is calm, the city's distant rumble softened to a low, steady breath. And now, you slow your steps. The air is gentler here, the streets empty, but for the occasional carriage rolling by like a memory. You feel the lingering traces of everything you've tasted tonight, each one a quiet echo of a different room, a different voice, a different era. The lamps stand like patient sentinels, their warm glow pooling on the cobblestones. A soft breeze threads between the buildings, carrying with it the last whispers of smoke, menthol, and the faint sweetness of something you can't quite name. Your shoulders drop, your jaw loosens, and the sounds of the city fade until they're no more than a slow heartbeat in the distance. You find a bench at the edge of the square, its wood worn smooth by decades of quiet watchers. Leaning back, you watch the shadows stretch, soften, and finally dissolve into the edges of sleep. The night holds you in no hurry, and you let it. The stories of Victorian remedies drift through your thoughts like drowsy lanterns, flickering, harmless now, their once potent magic reduced to nothing more than gentle curiosity. The air feels warmer, the world slower, and you can almost hear the city sigh, settling into its own slumber. Your breathing deepens, matching its rhythm until there is only the stillness and the quiet promise of rest.